Good morning, dear students. Today, inshallah, we're going to start the second part in lesson one, carbohydrates. Last time, we have learned about the carbohydrates and how it's one of the polymers or the biological macromolecules that we have in our body. Today, inshallah, we're going to continue what we have started last time. And please, if you don't remember anything, just refer to the last video I sent you. We will start with the carbohydrates. We will revise the last part, which is the types of carbohydrates. احنا قلنا ان احنا عندنا many types of carbohydrates. في عندنا simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. Here, from the simple carbohydrates, we have monosaccharides, and we have learned from these monosaccharide glucose, fructose, and galactose, and also ribose, which present in the DNA. The second example for the simple sugar is disaccharide, maltose, sucrose, and lactose, and it consists of two molecules of sugars. And finally, we have the complex carbohydrates or polysaccharides, mean that it contains many glucose molecules attached together in certain way. وده بيدينا complex type of carbohydrates اللي هي الستارش, which present in plants, glycogen, which present in animals and humans, cellulose, which present in plants. Okay, طيب, let's now take some examples for the food that contains these carbohydrates. Here, the monosaccharides, meaning that we have one molecule of sugar, and it contains from 3 to 6 carbon atoms. We have here the glucose or the grape sugar or the blood sugar. It's present in grape, or we can call it blood sugar. Fructose, it's present in fruits. Galactose, it's present in the milk. And finally, ribose sugar, present in the nucleic acid or our DNA. Disaccharides mean that it consists of two molecules of monosaccharides linked together. وكنا قلنا قبل كده ان كل الدايساكرايدز لازم يبقى فيها جلوكوز molecule together with another monosaccharide. طيب عندنا زي مثلا المالتوز قلنا it consists of two glucose molecules, and we may call it malt sugar. malt ده اللي هو الشعير. طيب السكروز ده present in the sugar cane بيبقى glucose and fructose. Finally, lactose, milk sugar, glucose and galactose. As you can see, all the disaccharides should contain glucose molecules attached with another monosaccharide. The polysaccharides or the complex sugar, it contains many monosaccharides linked together. زي عندنا السليلوز قلنا ان هو present in the plant, الستارش also present in plant, glycogen in animals and human, and they are stored, as we said, in the liver and the muscles of the animal or human. Right. Let's now take some questions about what we have learned till now. Choose the correct answer. This is one of the common questions that you're going to see in your exams, inshallah. Choose the correct answer. The normal sequence for producing energy inside the corn plant cell is ATP, then glucose, then starch, then energy. Starch, glucose, ATP, energy. Glucose, energy, starch or ATP. Energy, starch, ATP and glucose. هنا في السؤال ده بيقول لنا the normal sequence for producing energy inside the corn plant. طيب احنا عندنا قلنا ان الكربوهيدرات is the source of energy in the plants and in the animals. قلنا ان في البلانتس الكربوهيدرات stored in form of starch, and in humans and animals بتبقى stored in form of glycogen. الجلايكوجين or the starch بيبتدوا ان هم يحصل لهم breaking down علشان change to glucose اللي هي simplest form of sugar. بعد كده الجلوكوز ده enter inside the cell. طيب احنا شفناها يا جماعة في هوريكم السلايد اللي احنا عملنا لها explaining قبل كده concerning production of energy. عندنا لو بصينا هنا للبيكتشر دي، احنا قلنا ان any food that we eat بيحصل له digestion and starch and change into glucose. This glucose will enter inside our body cell, and inside the body cell it will enter inside certain organelle inside the cell, which is the mitochondria. Inside the mitochondria, the glucose will be oxidized and change into another chemical compound, which is the ATP. ال ATP ده هو اللي لما بيحصل له breaking down للبونز بتاعته بيعمل production ل large amount of energy. That's why we can consider ان ال ATP ده ال energy currency inside our body. طيب دلوقتي احنا في ال question اللي قابلنا ده. Sorry. Here in this question بيسألنا على sequence for producing energy. احنا قلنا ان دايما عندنا السيكونس we'll start with carbohydrates وبعدين يبتدي يحصل لها digestion لغاية ما توصل للجلوكوز. الجلوكوز يحصل له oxidation inside the mitochondria وبعد كده يعمل لنا production of ATP وبعد كده يعمل لنا ال production of energy. طيب هنا عندنا بيقول لنا هنا ATP we'll start with ATP then glucose then we will change it into starch وبعدين الستارش هيدينا energy. طبعا دي هنا ما تنفعش علشان احنا ما ينفعش ان احنا ناخد من الستارش energy، لازم تتحول الاول لايه؟ لجلوكوز. طيب هنا في second choice عندنا starch breaking down into glucose، الجلوكوز change into ATP وبعد كده يدينا الانرجي. هو ده عندنا ال correct choice لان احنا البلانت احنا بنتكلم على الكورن بلانت، فدايما الكربوهيدراتس will be stored in starch، فالستارش change into glucose break down into glucose then glucose is oxidized in the mitochondria to be changed into ATP then the ATP will give us energy. The next question, all the following give similar monomers on their hydrolysis. Hydrolysis means they're breaking down except the. طيب ايه ال choices اللي عندنا؟ starch, glycogen, sucrose and maltose. طيب let's talk about each one of these carbohydrates. احنا عندنا الستارش glycogen دي from the complex sugar. Sucrose and maltose are from the simple sugar. طيب احنا عارفين ان ال complex sugar starch and glycogen are made of large number of glucose molecules attached with each other. يبقى احنا هنا دي لما نعمل لها hydrolysis او breaking down they will change into glucose اللي هي similar monomer. يبقى هنا ده glucose it will give us monomer glucose. طيب what about ال glycogen? Also when we break glycogen or make hydrolysis to glycogen also it will change into glucose. طيب what about sucrose and maltose? Sucrose and maltose these are disaccharides consists of glucose with another monosaccharide. طيب هنا عندنا sucrose when we break it it will give us glucose and fructose. Maltose when we break it or we make hydrolysis to it it will give us 2 molecules of glucose. يبقى هنا all these carbohydrates give similar monomers اللي هي الجلوكوز except number C which is the sucrose because when we break it لما نكسره هيدينا glucose and fructose not glucose only like the others. يبقى هنا our choice will be number C. The next, now we are going to talk about the test for the simple sugar. احنا خلاص خلصنا الكربوهيدراتس اخدنا examples واخدنا الامبورتنس والتايبس بتاعتها، ناقص نعرف التست بتاعها. وزي ما قلنا التست معناها ان احنا هنعمل chemical experiment او chemical test in order to discover if this food contains carbohydrates or not. احنا في عندنا هنا certain reagent that we use to test for simple sugar. simple sugar يعني المونوساكرايدز والدايساكرايدز. هنا by using Bendiget's reagent. Bendiget's reagent ده chemical reagent عبارة عن mixture of different chemical compounds. Okay, it's able to change the color of carbohydrates. Its color changes in the presence of carbohydrates from blue into red. From blue to red. Now we will see a movie about for this test. Sorry.
Okay, food test for reducing sugars. You need a test tube rack, 2 test tubes, one for the control, one for the actual experiment.
Here, as you can see, he added Bendiget reagent in both of the test tubes. The one that contains water and the other that contains glucose. And then he's going to add them in a water bath. According to the concentration of the glucose in the water, the color is going to change gradually from blue into red. As you can see here in the video. Here we have the control test tube. Nothing happened to it as it doesn't contain any glucose. And this one is a positive test for glucose. Its color changed to orange, but if we increase the concentration of glucose, it's going to change into red. بس طبعا احنا يعني التست عندنا ان احنا it changes from blue to red. طيب. What about the complex sugar? The complex sugar we're going to test for starch. احنا عارفين يا جماعة ان الستارش ده على فكرة التست ده احنا ممكن نعمله في البيت عادي. لو عندنا starch and iodine solution. iodine solution ده اللي هو زي البيتادين اللي احنا بنستخدمه مطهر للجروح عندنا. لو احنا جبنا test tube containing water and we added starch and then we add iodine solution, its color is going to change into blue. This is the test for the complex sugar or starch. يبقى احنا دلوقتي عرفنا التست for the carbohydrates. We have the Bendiget reagent to test for the simple sugar زي الجلوكوز, and we have here test for complex sugar starch which is iodine. This is a video for testing for starch. I'm sorry. هشغله لكم. This is the iodine solution. And here is the starch. We're going to add water in both of them. And in one of them, we will add starch. As you know, starch is from the complex carbohydrates. It doesn't dissolve in water. As you can see, it's not going to dissolve in water, it's just going to be suspended in the water like this. And the other glass we will not add starch, we will leave it as control. control معناها ان احنا هنشوف الديفرنس عشان نقدر نعرف الديفرنس ما بين البوزيتيف تيست والنيجاتيف تيست. حاجه فيها ستارش الحاجه اللي احنا بنعمل لها تيستنج، وحاجه ما فيهاش هنشوف هيبقى شكلها عامل ازاي with the chemical reagent that we are going to use. And now we will add iodine solution. The iodine solution, it has brown color. With the water it will remain brown, but in case of starch its color will change into blue or dark blue. As you can see in the water, it remained brown, but in case of starch, it will change into blue. Now, can you see the difference? This is a positive test for starch. Now we're going to talk about the second kind of polymers that we have in our cell, which is the lipids or the fats. Of course, we are going to know the same about it. We're going to talk about examples for the food that contains fats or lipids, its importance, its type, and also a test for the fats. Examples for food containing lipids دي بتبقى very famous يا جماعة، احنا كلنا عارفينها. احنا عندنا example for the lipids we have oil, fats أي حاجة فيها fat زي الباتر مثلا، الواكس، phospholipids and we are going to talk about it. Phospholipids دي something that enter in the structure of the cell membrane. Derivatives of lipids, something that we make from the lipids like cholesterol and hormones. What's about the chemical structure of lipid? Lipid is made of two parts, made of an alcohol called glycerol, and the second part fatty acid. How does it look like? احنا عندنا الجليسرول ده it's a kind of alcohol with 3 hydroxyl group. الجليسرول ده هتسمعوه كتير قوي في الكيمستري ان شاء الله. ده الكيميكال structure بتاعه. As you can see it consists of carbon and hydrogen. Okay, each carbon atom attached to hydrogen and hydroxyl group اللي هي ال OH group دي بسميها hydroxyl group. الهيدروكسيل جروب دي بتبقى attached ل fatty acid ده it's a certain kind of acid بيحصل release للهيدروجين اللي موجودة في الجليسرول دي وبيبقى بيحصل attached للفاتي acids دي. يبقى احنا عندنا الليبيدز بتبقى consists of glycerol attached with 3 fatty acids. Why glycerol? It contains 3 hydroxyl groups. هنا عندنا الليبيدز دي it's insoluble in polar solvent like water بس بتبقى soluble in non-polar solvent like البنزين and carbon tetrachloride. عشان كده احنا لما بيبقى في عندنا ستين على اللبس بتاعنا يقول لك ايه دي مش هتطلع غير ببنزين. لو الستين دي made from something fats او greasy زي مثلا الشحم او في زيت وقع على لبسنا او بقعه سمنه او حاجه من الحاجات اللي هي الفاتي دي، مش ممكن هتطلع بالووتر. لازم بنستخدم certain kind of solvents اللي هي non polar solvents زي البنزين او كربون تتراكلورايد. هي دي بس اللي تقدر تشيلها علشان هي بتبقى insoluble in polar solvents زي الووتر. طيب الفورميشن of lipids. How does the lipid is formed؟ احنا في عندنا ادي هنا عندنا الجليسرول، عندنا with 3 hydroxyl group و 3 fatty acid، ده الكيميكال structure of the fatty acid. هنا عندنا بيحصل combining between the glycerol and the fatty acid with release of water. 3 molecules of water. ده هنا بنسميه triglyceride. triglyceride ده glycerol with 3 fatty acids، عشان كده بنسميه triglyceride and 3 molecules of water are released. This is how the lipids are formed. Glycerol with 3 fatty acids. This process we call it dehydration. Dehydration because we removed 3 molecules of water. طيب العكس بقى اسمها hydrolysis. When we add water, okay, we're going to break down it. We call this process hydrolysis. يبقى احنا في عندنا two opposite reactions. Dehydration means the removal of water, and hydrolysis means the addition of water. What's the importance of lipids؟ احنا هنا دلوقتي عندنا الليبيدز او الفاتس اللي احنا موجودة عندنا في البادي بتاعنا. اول حاجة ان هي it's a very important source of energy. We use it to obtain energy just like carbohydrates. But here عندنا الليبيدز دي it's a slow source of energy. Meaning what? Meaning if our body contains both carbohydrates and lipids، لو الجسم بتاعنا فيه الاثنين carbohydrates and lipids، البادي بتاعنا لما يحتاج انرجي هيبتدي يعمل burning الاول الكربوهيدرات، وبعد كده يبتدي يعمل burning لما الكربوهيدرات تخلص وياخد الانرجي اللي هو محتاجها. لما البادي ما يلاقيش كربوهيدرات يبتدي يتجه يعمل burning للليبيدز او الفاتس for producing energy. عشان كده لو حد بيعمل ريجيم يقولك مثلا ايه، انت وقف الكاربس، ما تاكلش اي حاجه فيها كربوهيدرات، علشان البادي بتاعنا لما ما يلاقيش كربوهيدرات داخلاله يبتدي يعمل بيرنينج للفاتس اللي موجوده في جسمنا، فيبتدي الوزن بتاعنا يقل. طيب السكند importance للليبيدز ان هي it helps in building the cell wall in our cell. It enters in the structure of the cell membrane والcell walls بتاعتنا. تالت حاجة عندنا ان هي it acts as thermal insulator. احنا عندنا اي فاتس بناكلها بيحصل لها accumulation under the skin ودي act as thermal insulator. It keeps our body warm. عشان كده مثلا في البولار بير هيلاقي فيه عنده large amount of fats stored under his skin، فدي it acts as heat insulator to keep his body warm. رابع حاجة إن هي it acts as protective layer ودي بنشوفها في الجرين plants. في عندنا some kinds of leaves تبقى covered with wax زي مثلا الكاكتس plant اللي هو الصبار، بيبقى فيه covered with a layer of fats or wax in order to prevent the evaporation of water. And also it enters in the structure of hormones. Types and classification of lipids. احنا في عندنا simple lipids, complex lipid and derivatives of lipids. السمبل lipids اللي احنا عارفينها كلنا يا جماعة اللي هي الاويل fats and wax. الاويل بتبقى زي اللي موجودة على الفeather of some kinds of birds، دي in order to prevent الووتر from holding it back. يعني احنا عارفين مثلا ان البيردز بتنزل في الميه علشان تصطاد السمك، فهي لازم، احنا عارفين ان الاويل doesn't mix with water، فلازم الفذر بتاعها بيكون covered with water covered with oil in order to prevent it from sinking in the water، عشان الريش بتاعها ما يشربش المية دي وتبقى تقيلة فتقدر ان هي تطير تاني لفوق. الفاتس زي ما قلنا بتبقى under the skin of the animals و act as heat insulator. الواكس we found it on the leaves of desert plants in order to prevent the evaporation of water from the desert plants. في عندنا الكومبلكس lipid، دي اللي هي الفوسفوليبيدز، بتبقى contains carbon, hydrogen, phosphorus and nitrogen، عشان كده بنسميها phospholipids. دي بتبقى helps in building the cell membrane. The derivatives of lipids it formed by the hydrolysis of simple lipids. We change it into cholesterol and hormones. طيب, let's talk about the simple lipids. What's the difference between the oil, fats and wax? Oil بتبقى made of glycerol with unsaturated fatty acid. Glycerol and unsaturated fatty acid. وهنعرف يعني ايه unsaturated fatty acid. الفاتس بتبقى glycerol and saturated fatty acid. الواكس بتبقى monohydric alcohol with high molecular weight fatty acid. يعني ايه monohydric alcohol؟ احنا كنا اتكلمنا على الجليسرول وقلنا ان هو تراي هيدريك الكول. تراي يعني عنده 3 هيدروكسيل جروب، عشان كده it's attached to 3 fatty acids. انما هنا in case of wax ده another kind of alcohol ما عندوش غير 1 hydroxyl group only، فبيبقى attached to only 1 fatty acid but with a very high molecular weight، وهنشوفها دلوقتي عاملة ازاي. Here as we said oil ده بيبقى liquid. Glycerol with unsaturated fatty acid. It covers the feather of water birds to prevent water penetration into their body زي ما قلنا. الفاتس دي بتكون solid، بتبقى saturated fatty acid with glycerol و stored under the skin and act as thermal insulator. عندنا الواكس ده بيبقى high molecular weight fatty acid with monohydric alcohol. يعني هنا الواكس هو الوحيد اللي عنده only one fatty acid attached to it. It covers the leaves of desert plant to reduce the water loss during transpiration of the plant. لو جينا هنا نشوف ايه الجليسرول والunsaturated fatty acid عشان يدينا الاويل. هنا ادي الجليسرول ودي الفاتي اسيد اللي attached to it. unsaturated معناها ان هي عندها هنا in this case double bond، معناها ان انا لسه مش مشبعه. it can carries more. carries more يعني ايه؟ يعني we can break this bond and add 2 hydrogen atom like these ones. هنا في الكيس بتاعت الفاتي acids في نمبر 1 ونمبر 2 دي اللي انا بشاور عليها دي كلهم saturated، مفيش اي double bond. I cannot add any more hydrogen atoms هنا وهنا. انما third one دي it contains double bond meaning that it's unsaturated, so we can break this bond and add more hydrogen atoms. This is what's meant by unsaturated fatty acid. Saturated fatty acids meaning that this bond will not be present. We will not find any double bond in the fatty acids. Phospholipids, as we said, phospholipids دي it's a complex lipids. It's structure similar للfat molecules بس بيبقى عندها phosphate group and choline group replacing the third fatty acid. هنا عندنا دي ادي عندنا this is the glycerol، في عندها 3 hydroxyl group. 2 of these hydroxyl groups are attached to fatty acid زي ما قلنا. الثيرد مش هتبقى attached لفاتي acid بس هتبقى attached لفوسفات جروب and choline group. يبقى احنا هنا عندنا الفوسفوليبيدز بيبقى عندها only two fatty acids attached to it. طيب احنا كنا قلنا مين اللي عنده only one fatty acid attached to it؟ Yes, that's correct. الواكس قلنا ان هو monohydric alcohol with a fatty acid with large molecular weight. هنا عندنا الفوسفوليبيدز ده الكومبلكس ليبيد. يبقى عندنا الجليسرول. Two of the hydroxyl group of the glycerol are attached to fatty acids. Third one is attached to phosphate group and choline group. And it helps in forming the cell membrane. هنا عندنا this is the structure of the cell membrane. الهيدز دي represent الphosphate group and the choline group. وهنا دي الfatty acids. Test for the lipids. How do we test if this food containing lipids or not? By using a chemical compound called Sudan 4. Sudan 4, its color change into red in the presence of fat. Sudan 4, it's a stain. It's a dye, it make a stain. Dye دي بتبقى صبغة خلاص. Its color change into red in the presence of fat. Choose the correct answer. Wax share fat in the what? Number of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen atoms that present in each atom, solubility in carbon tetrachlorides, presence of 3 hydroxyl groups in their structure, presence of 1 hydroxyl group in their structure. احنا عندنا what's the difference of wax and fats. احنا عندنا الواكس قلنا الكيميكال ستراكشر بتاعه ان هو monohydric alcohol with 1 fatty acid. انما الفاتس بتبقى عندنا glycerol with saturated fatty acids. طيب هنا الواكس share الفاتس in which one of them? Which one of them we are going to choose? Yes, solubility in carbon tetrachloride. Here, because they don't have the same number of carbon and hydrogen and oxygen atoms, they don't have 3 hydroxyl group, both of them. عندنا الواكس عندها only 1 hydroxyl group. Presence of 1 hydroxyl group, only the wax has 1 hydroxyl group and not the fat. طيب هما share in what? Yes, both of them are insoluble in polar solvent, but both of them are soluble in benzene and carbon tetrachloride, as we said. That's all for today, my dear students. By now, we have finished the second kind of polymer, which is the lipids. See you next time, inshallah. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call me. Thank you and goodbye.